Okay, so tonight we're very excited to hear from Nathan Thompson and Erica Webb. Nathan and Erica both work with an organization called Grow the Flow. And the flow that they want to grow is the flow towards the Great Salt Lake. And I believe Utah Lake as well. Is that right? Maybe. They'll tell you. Um, both Nathan and Erica are seniors at BYU, and they both graduate next week. So that is very exciting for them. Nathan is studying environmental science and sustainability. His research focuses on relating, or his research focus, sorry, relates to bridging the gap between environmental issues and the communities interacting with those issues. And he has worked as the public relations coordinator for Grow the Flow and the operations manager for Conserve Utah Valley, which is an affiliate organization. Erica Webb, again, also a senior at BYU, studying economics with a minor in environmental science and a minor in math. She works on public relations as well for Grow the Flow. And she also leads an economic research project using machine learning to link historical records across census years. So they're both, as you can tell, very intelligent people who are doing a lot of good work and are here to tell us more about the work they've done for the Great Salt Lake and what that means and how we can apply it to our lives, regardless of where we live. So without further ado, I will stop talking and I will turn the time over to Nathan and Erica.
Awesome. Well, I will go ahead and share my screen. Perfect. So yeah, today we wanted to talk just a little bit about kind of what we're calling faith-based action for saving Great Salt Lake, um, which is a really important thing. So to kind of begin, I wanted to go over a little bit of background on how is Great Salt Lake doing for those who aren't in Utah. I'm sure you're still aware, but Great Salt Lake is a major part of Utah. Um, it covers a large swath of land right next to Salt Lake City, which is, of course, the urban hub of Utah. Um, and so the success or failure of the lake is incredibly important for the livelihood of Utahns in a lot of different ways. So first, here's a little time lapse that Google Earth has kind of put together that shows the water levels of Great Salt Lake over time. And to me, it's really sobering to see. So we start over in the 80s, um, and we have a little bit of fluctuation, but then especially over the past decade, it goes down. And I'll play one more time. Stop there when it gets to today. Here we go. So it's, if I remember it, approximately about a third of the lake surface is covered by water, and the rest is dry. And the dry lake bed has a lot of different consequences um, that we'll talk a little bit more later on. So a couple of stats for you. One, it's 19 feet before its average natural level since 1850. It's lost about 73% of its water and 60% of its surface area. It's dropped since 2020 with an average deficit of about 1.2 million acre feet per year. And kind of on that, one of the, I'd call it one of the scary things about this is, unfortunately, that's an estimate. It could be more, it could be less. The It's something that researchers are still trying to figure out exactly how much water do we need. Um, and and that's an important thing for us to figure out quickly. So it's on track to um, disappear, or if not disappear, become severely ecologically damaged, and which will result in huge public health damages as well. Um, and so there's a lot going on and a lot that needs to be done. So here's a chart just kind of showing the changes in lake elevation over time since the early 1900s. And of course, there's lots of natural variation. Here in the 80s, we had um, quite a bit of flooding, where it was, I believe, the highest recorded lake level, at least in the past 100 years. And then we go down until we have the lower level yellow kind of rhombus, diamond, whatever you want to call it. That's what the lake levels were in 2022, I believe, which is the lowest recorded lake level on record. And then I think the next yellow rhombus is this year, or maybe 2023 if there's not 2024 data. So fortunately, because of the past year or two having really good snowpack, the lake's been able to rebound slightly. But as I'm sure you also notice, it's still in the red zone, and there are adverse effects impacting the ecosystem in a lot of different ways. Whether that's the birds or the bugs or other things like that. So it kind of begs the question, okay, as we saw, there were some natural variations. Can we quantify how much is actually due to humans? And we can. There's some models that have been done, and it's estimated that the lake's about 15 feet lower because of human water consumption. And that's significant. Um, Fortunately, though, that means that there's actually something we can do about it. If it was just natural variation, then there's some larger victories we have to win with climate change first. But right now, there's things that we can do because we're the ones using the water. So where's the water going? The biggest user is agriculture, about 75%. What this means isn't that farmers are the enemy. And in fact, it's actually the opposite. It means that they have to be part of the solution. And so one of the things that Grow the Flow is doing, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, is focusing on a collaboration, especially with agricultural land users, because working with them is the only way that we're going to be able to save the lake. As I mentioned before, there's a lot that we just don't know because water accounting in the state has been a little bit lacking. But there's a lot of work being done trying to quantify how much water is being used, and from that, how much water do we need to save? Climate change does account for some of it, about 10% of the water losses attributed to that. And that's because of increased temperatures, meaning increased evaporation. And then, of course, there is some personal water usage. As on the little chart there, cities and industries is almost 10%, and that's municipal use, so personal use. One thing to note about that is most of the water use that's prevented from going to the lake is in lawns, grass. Our indoor water use, interestingly enough, is once it goes through our sewers and into the wastewater treatment plants, it's actually then put back into the water bodies. And so as one of our collaborators and phenomenal Great Salt Lake wildlife photographer said, go ahead and flush. Flush the toilets, use your showers. It ends up going to the lake, which is a little bit different than in other water deficit situations. So here's a couple numbers. We're estimating that about 1 million acre feet of water is needed annually, but we've only conserved about 100,000 acre feet so far. So we have a long way to go, but we're on a good start, and we'll keep making progress. The number at the top is that 100,000 people needed for the Public Action Network, and that's another thing we'll talk about more in depth later. But one of the biggest things that Grow the Flow that we are focused on is building public action. And so getting people informed and engaged and involved so that they can let their elected officials know, hey, these are the issues that we are passionate and care about. Do something, or we'll have to vote someone else in next year. And so the public, we as the community of Utah and around the United States really have a lot of power in what we can do for the lake. So a couple of things, what are we going to lose if we don't save the lake? One of the biggest things is the ecology, the birds. Great Salt Lake provides for over 10 million birds each year that fly through along the Great Pacific Flyway. And this little graphic shows a lot of the different birds that end up stopping at the Great Salt Lake at some point during the year. And they rely on the lake for nesting grounds. They rely on the brine shrimp and brine flies that live in the lake for food. A lot of them lose over 75% of their mass flying from South America. And if they don't have the food they need, we'll end up with a lot larger bird kills and even more endangered species. One thing that Grow the Flow just did recently was assist with a petition to get the Wilson's phalarope listed because it's one of the species that is severely threatened by the loss of the lake. And so we need all hands on deck in order to save it. And by saving it means we save the lake, which means we save the lives of the people living around it. There's also a lot of industries, and so losing the lake would result in huge economic losses from mining of salt and magnesium and other rare earth metals to the brine shrimp industry, which not only supports the birds, but it also is sent out around the United States and even the world as food for other larger shrimp, which then we consume. And then, of course, agriculture, which we talked about a little bit earlier.
All right. So I feel like Nathan set the scene perfectly, kind of explaining why this is such a big problem and something that's really worthy of our attention. And I want to point out before I start that I know that many of us aren't located in Utah. And personally, I am living in Utah at the moment, but I'm not from Utah either. And so this may feel like a really Utah specific issue, but actually I would pose that it is relevant to all of us. And there's a few reasons why. One, the watershed that contributes to Great Salt Lake extends outside of Utah. So we're talking about other states, especially to the north, such as Idaho. Their water use is directly contributing to this issue. And a second reason, which Nathan just touched on, is that this is quickly becoming a federal issue. So in one sense, like we are trying to invoke the Endangered Species Act for the Wilson's phalarope, like Nathan mentioned. Secondly, any solution, frankly, to solve this lake is going to involve some form of federal funding. And so with the federal government being involved in the solution for Great Salt Lake, I think this absolutely applies not only to Utah residents or to individuals living near the lake, but to all of us. So moving on, we wanted to highlight some other saline lakes and any like success or failure stories that we can cover in the past. And so currently, this map is showing saline lakes around the world, and there's an overall 60% loss of these saline lakes globally. Additionally, there are no current success stories about a full saline lake recovery. So that is a little bit harrowing to read when you are working really hard to try to save a saline lake. But I really do believe that Utah and Great Salt Lake could be the first. So we'll move to first one example here in the United States, Owens Lake. Owens Lake is a saline lake located in California. It's smaller than Great Salt Lake, but the water was initially diverted in the early 1900s. And that diversion was related to municipal use to grow the city of Los Angeles. Yeah, you can hit the next slide, Nathan. Thanks. And so with that municipal use, the lake was drained in a matter of 13 years. This is obviously an earlier day where maybe we wouldn't see this rapid of water use in our current day with more of an eye towards conservation, but the lake was completely dried up by 1926. And this led to some of the worst PM10 levels in the country. Maybe many of you know what PM10 is, but I didn't until I took an environmental economics class. So PM10 is particulate matter, and then the 10 is like a reference to the size of that particulate matter. So what that's saying is that there are like federal regulations related to how much PM10 can be in the air, as well as like PM5 and PM2. And that is like a measure of air quality. And so when it has the worst PM10 levels in the country, it means it has some of the worst air quality. And that's a direct result of that lake bed being exposed when the water is removed. So the mitigation of the dust in this area has cost the state of California $2.5 billion, and that's just so far. I want to emphasize that the costs are continuing to skyrocket, unfortunately. This kind of problem, there's really, once the lake bed is exposed, there's really not a permanent solution other than restoring the lake. The dust that is left behind by the lake bed often has like toxic chemicals. And even beyond that, just the dust events that happen, like the dust storms from the wind, there's no water to prevent those dust storms from occurring. And so those events cause huge amounts of particulate matter to go into the air. And again, the only way to prevent that is to have a lake sitting on top of the lake bed. And so this cost is continuing to go up every single year that California is needing to spend money to mitigate the dust. And so there are 40,000 people that live near this lake that are permanent residents, and they are being affected with higher rates of air quality related disease and asthma. And additionally, in the areas where the lake bed is like the most toxic and has the most chemicals, there is evidence that it can lead to increased cancer rates as well. So another example that we want to highlight is the Aral Sea. And the Aral Sea also, much of its water has been consumed. For the Aral Sea, the diversion was primarily for agriculture, since there's a large cotton industry in the area. And the usage of the water to the point where the lake was dried up, it completely destroyed the fishing industry in the area. And additionally, they're struggling with these same problems of toxic lake beds. And so their toxic lake bed also is mixed with fertilizers and pesticides due to the agriculture in the area, which leads to much higher cancer rates than should be expected, and other serious illness, again, associated with that particulate matter in the air. And so with the Aral Sea, similar to the Great Salt Lake, there are multiple arms of the lake, and currently there is an effort to restore the northern arm, which is being like semi-rescued at this point. The southern arm is still in deep decline and not likely to be rescued in the near future. So these are pretty sobering stories, considering the Great Salt Lake, but I think it's also really important to understand these stories because this is what's at stake with the Great Salt Lake. There literally is a city, Salt Lake City, right next to the lake that will be totally exposed to these same problems. So with the Great Salt Lake, more than 800 square miles of that lake bed are already exposed, and over 80% of Utah's population lives close enough to the lake to be affected by these dust events if the lake were to completely disappear. And the Great Salt Lake dust, it's laced with arsenic and other dangerous substances. And frankly, like we don't even know all of the consequences, the health consequences that could be associated with those. Obviously, arsenic, not good. But there's currently studies being done showing that like there's a possibility that this will not only increase cancer and asthma rates, but also like ALS rates. And so could be really disastrous and also a huge economic problem. Like Nathan was mentioning earlier, the Great Salt Lake, it's associated with a lot of industries that produce revenue for Utah. And even though those industries, it's complicated to talk about, okay, what role should these industries have going forward, since they do play a role in limiting the water in the lake. However, if we think about the lake disappearing entirely, I'm studying economics, like was mentioned. So this is the way that my brain works. Not only are we losing revenue streams, but we're also gaining a huge liability of now we're going to have to spend millions, possibly billions of dollars mitigating the damage that would result from this dried up lake bed. And so this graph that we'll show here again is just showing those water levels that Nathan showed previously. And so each one of these lines is showing the progression of the elevation of the water like over the course of the year. and then each line is a separate year. And the years are also coded by decades. So you can see that those 1990s are the faintest lines, and those are going to all be at the top. And then 2022 is the most recent data in this graph. And this, again, is a record low by a lot.
Let's see. Okay, so that we wanted to get the kind of the scary stuff out of the way first. So then we can focus on, all right, here's all of these reasons why it'd be really, really bad to lose Great Salt Lake on all fronts. And now we can kind of focus on some of the more hopeful stuff. And one of those is focusing on the doctrinal reasons, according to the gospel of Jesus Christ that we're taught, of why we need to take care of Great Salt Lake. And for me, these are some of the most motivating reasons. But first, story time. 2 stories for you. The first is the years of plenty and the years of famine. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the story of Joseph of Egypt in the Bible. He was sold by his brothers, went to Egypt, cast into prison, but eventually, through his obedience and diligence and honestly the grace of God, he was made the second most powerful man in all of Egypt, which is just incredible. But during that time, he had a vision of the 7 fat cows and the 7 scrawny cows, representing years of plenty and years of famine. And they were told to prepare up during the years of plenty for the coming years of famine. And I think that we can use this as an analogy or use Book of Mormon language. We can liken it unto ourselves, in that the past couple years have been years of plenty, in that we've had increased snowpack, which means more runoff and precipitation, just water getting to the lake. And we've been able to put off a lot of the consequences that were otherwise coming. But what we can't let that do is let us get distracted or lazy about keeping up the progress that had been made with policies and personal action and getting businesses to change, and all these different things. We need to keep preparing, because there's a guarantee that eventually we'll have a really bad snow year. That's just kind of how it works, whether it's a long-term thing or not. Unless we do something, the lake is going to dry up. And so we need to remember that. The second story is how Great Salt Lake saved Utahns in the past. And this is a more specific story to the Latter-day Saints who first came and settled in the Great Salt Lake Valley. And I'm sure many of you know it as well. But when they first came in, they were farming and planting crops. But then eventually there were a lot of crickets and bugs that started just tearing up their fields. And they were likely to starve if that kept happening. But then one day, a bunch of seagulls came and ate the crickets and basically saved the crops and saved these people's lives. And what often we don't think about, but I think is really important, is the reason that there were seagulls in the first place is because we have a large inland sea, and large bodies of water where they could live. And I think remembering that allows us to say, all right, Great Salt Lake helped us in the past. Let's help it now. It's time to repay the favor and do a good turn.
So we just wanted to share this scripture really quickly, and I'm sure you've heard it before. I love this one. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And we truly believe that this applies to Great Salt Lake and to environmental issues that we care about in general. I know that God has given us the earth, and God loves the earth and has the same or probably far more reverence for it than I do. And I know that these issues that we care about and feel so deeply about, God cares about those issues too, and he weeps with us. And I know that he has given us not just an outlook of fear and the scary emotions that are associated with learning about issues like this, but of power and of love. And I think that's hope that we can have moving forward with this issue, that we really can make a difference and it's not too late to intervene and rescue this lake if we really are willing to make a change and make a sacrifice. So we wanted to share just a quick clip from Elder Kosei's talk with you all. I'm sure you're very familiar, but we couldn't help ourselves. This is one of our favorites, so we'll just share that with you now.
While visiting as God's children, we have received a charge to be stewards, caretakers, and guardians of his divine creations. The Lord said that he made every man accountable as a steward of our earthly blessings, which I have made and prepared for my creatures. Our Heavenly Father allows us to use earthly resources according to our own free will. Yet, our agency should not be interpreted as license to use or consume the riches of this world without wisdom or restraint. The Lord gave this admonition, and it pleases God that he hath given all these things unto man. For unto this end were they made, to be used with judgment, not to excess, neither by extortion. President Russell M. Nelson once remarked, quote, "As beneficiaries of the divine creation, what shall we do? We should care for the earth, be wise stewards over it, and preserve it for future generations," close quote. Beyond being simply a scientific or political necessity, the care of the earth and of our natural environment is a sacred responsibility entrusted to us by God, which should fill us with a deep sense of duty and humility. It is also an integral component of our discipleship. How can we honor and love Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ without honoring and loving their creations? There are many.
And I just love that clip. I love, like, you can really feel that he has that love and respect for the earth behind his words. And so just to reiterate that last paragraph that he shared again, beyond being simply a scientific or political necessity, the care of the earth and of our natural environment is a sacred responsibility. And I have really felt that and come to see that, especially throughout going through my college classes. I just really deeply feel that we do have this sacred responsibility that we owe to Great Salt Lake to protect it.
All right. So another quote, and this is from, I want to say last summer, or last spring during the Stegner Symposium at University of Utah. Bishop W. Christopher Waddell gave a really, really cool presentation and speech about being wise stewards of water, specifically with Great Salt Lake. And so this is what he said. "We have expanded our teaching of the guiding principle of wise stewardship to emphasize the need to care for our natural resources and encourage our global employees to lead out in their efforts to implement creative solutions within the church's operations that, in the words of President Emerson Ballard, protect the future for all God's children." And that really, I think, sums it up, that we are to protect the future for all of God's children. We have this duty and this mandate from our Heavenly Father to do that and to take care of the blessings that He's given us. One of the really cool things that Bishop Waddell also announced during this talk was that the church donated 20,000 acre-feet worth of water shares, which currently is the largest single donation to the lake. However, in the grand scheme of things, where we're needing 1 million or more acre-feet of water, it's just one of the first drops in the bucket. But it's a big drop and an important drop, and something that we need to keep working towards and making progress with, as more and more, hopefully, organizations and individuals are see this example and choose to follow that and donate water and get water back to the lake. And the church has actually done some really cool things. In addition to just donating water, they've made some big efforts in moving to water-wise landscaping, to increasing the sustainability and decreasing the footprint of new church buildings and temples that are being built all over the world, which I think is a really cool thing that we often miss, that the church and our leaders are really invested in making sure that our earth is protected, and especially for Salt Lake, where the headquarters is, that we're making a valiant effort to protecting that area.
Okay, so you've heard a lot about the Great Salt Lake and the issues that are facing it and our doctrinal duty to help support the lake and restore it. So now you're probably wondering, what does that look like? What does that mean? And Nathan and I work with this organization, Grow the Flow, and our slogan is kind of get water to the lake. We would love to just share with you a little bit about what Grow the Flow does. And so there's 4 pillars that make up our organization: the Public Action Network, the Water Policy Accelerator, the Research Coordination Network, and the Impact Fund. So the Public Action Network, that's primarily where Nathan and I both work right now. And our main goal is to build a network of 100,000 engaged citizens. Probably a lot of these people are going to be in Utah, but the great news for any of you who are interested in this issue is that you can also join. Like I was talking about, it's kind of turning into a federal issue. But we would love to build this network of 100,000 people who care about this issue, who are willing to show up, who are willing to contact their legislators, who are willing to talk to their neighbors, who are willing but maybe don't know the first step. And so our job is to amass this network and to reach them and to help provide them with those next steps. Second, our Water Policy Accelerator. So this is a group that's actually housed at the Stegner Center within the University of Utah Law School. And so they are supporting effective legislation and political relationships. So that is, they're primarily like drafting bills, they're drafting ideas that can be brought to the Utah legislature to help address this issue. They're also kind of identifying key players that we could work with. And Grow the Flow, we are willing to work with both parties. We're like a nonpartisan group, and so we're happy to work with anybody who will listen. And so the Water Policy Accelerator helps us do that. The Research Coordination Network is a way for us to help unite researchers across the watershed and across the state of Utah who are working on water issues to study what is actually effective in getting water to the lake, and also the consequences of not getting water to the lake, all Great Salt Lake related issues. There's a lot of like fragmentation between universities or between research centers. And so our Research Coordination Network is working to unite these fronts in a more collaborative way to have the most efficient and effective solutions for Great Salt Lake. Then finally, our Impact Fund is designed to develop partnerships to foster these solutions. And so it's not about just raising money for Grow the Flow, although that would be great, but it's really about raising money for all organizations who are working for solutions to Great Salt Lake, because again, this is supposed to be collaborative and it's going to work the best if we can all work together. It's amazing what you can get accomplished if you forget about who gets the credit. And so we are really trying to create this fund that will propel projects both within Grow the Flow and outside Grow the Flow that are working towards Great Salt Lake solutions in the long term.
Right. So what we've done so far, I think is really cool. So as a little background, we started, officially launched last October. So it's been 7 months-ish, give or take. And during that time, we've gone from a network of 0 to 800 plus and growing, which obviously is far and away from 100,000, but I think it's a really impressive start and shows that they care. And they want to get involved and help out. We've used our network, that kind of fledgling group, to stop the progress of the Bear River Development Project, which, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, it was it's not dead, but we've put some roadblocks in. It was a proposal that's been around several decades, and it was a proposal to build a dam up on the Bear River, or a series of dams rather, that would have prevented around or even more than 200,000 acre-feet of water from getting to the lake, which would have reversed all progress that we've made so far. And so, using our network to contact legislators and then work with several to draft bills, we were able to stop progress from being made. And obviously, it's still a threat, and we still have to be aware of it. But we were able to put a pause, which is a huge success. We've also built bridges in the advocacy community, working with basically every organization that has something to do with Great Salt Lake to host rallies and other events, and just build a community to save the lake. And then another thing we've done, which is a little bit unique, is we've created a network of student chapters across the state. And so if there's any of you who are students at other universities, whether BYU, Utah State, University of Utah, anywhere, or even high school students, we've worked with groups there. And our aim, these are still in progress, but our aim is to get these functioning semi-independently, so they can host their own events and get people involved. And so we can just have people on call everywhere throughout the state to do whatever work's necessary to get water to Great Salt Lake. So what can you do to help? One of the first things is to join the network. On the next slide, we've got a QR code that will allow you to go to our website, which is growtheflowutah.org, if you want to go there now. We send out a newsletter every week to every other week, and they're short. Usually it's just a couple of things that are either events coming up or some valuable information that we think you might want to know, or occasionally it's a specific ask for either feedback or tasks that we need help with. You can sign up to help lead the PAN. This is something that we're working on developing a little bit more. But we have the goal to create local leaders across the watershed to help organize community members and volunteers, and really help propel this movement forward. Along with this, if you have time, money, or other resources that you want to donate, we're always open to that. We make sure that everything that you have to provide goes to the lake. That's our biggest goal. And then, of course, spread the word. If you've got friends, family, frenemies, anyone really that you think might be interested in Great Salt Lake, please, please invite them to learn about us and to get involved in some way. So here's the QR code to join the movement. We need people.
And it looks like the link's also in the chat as well.
Oh, perfect. Maybe we'll just use that so you don't have to pull out your phones. All right. So kind of the final things that we need your help with. So one, and you can put these in the chat, or I think even kind of unmute and share a brief thought. I want to keep it kind of short to make sure that we can hear from multiple people. And the larger questions are kind of these, but the main questions I think that your input would be especially valuable on is, what do you think that the broader community should know about the lake, either based on what was shared today or other knowledge that you have? And then the other question is, if you had unlimited resources, what would you do to save the lake? whether you think it's a flop idea or the next big thing, we're looking for everything. And so be creative. We'd love to hear some of your ideas.
So if anyone wants to chime in on their mic, they're more than welcome. Or if you want to put it in the chat, I can read it out loud. We can give you a minute to think. I'll start. And I went to BYU, but I haven't lived in Utah in 10 years. So I might be a little removed from the situation, but I do remember a lot of like the Salt Lake is gross kind of thing. And Utah Lake is gross. And so I would say what the broader community might want to know is that maybe even if it doesn't smell great, it's still very important to the ecosystem, and your life would be affected by it. It's not just the animals.
Yeah, I love that. Kind of changing the perceptions or the preconceived notions that people might have. Absolutely.
Yeah. Who else?
I could read something that comes from a place of despair. It's a poem I wrote when I was going back home. I grew up in Provo by Utah Lake. And then I traveled north to Salt Lake and southern Idaho. And meanwhile, where I live now, Northern California, was burning up. And so I wrote a poem about where have you gone, meaning where is the water gone? And if that would ever be useful in the work of motivating people, you're glad to. Can I read it? Can I take a moment to read it?
Please.
Yeah.
Okay. Where have you gone? Once I would call and you would come in the creek, in the swamp sucking mud, or bubbling through the black walls of the Snake as it rushed to join mighty Columbia. I call, but you do not hear. Once I could twist a faucet and you would greet me, could bid the toilet swirl you away, bearing stinky dung to places I never cared to know. My cup is empty. Where are you hiding? Once, with mouth open to the sky, rain would wet my tongue, causing my heart to overflow. Looking upward to find you, I see only clouds of gritty smoke. The warming sea enslaved you as you melted helplessly in the north. He commands and you obey, invading land he covets near the shore. You are vassal to the raging storms who bids you destroy all lying before his fury. Trees expose their roots beside bloated bodies on salted, soggy earth. Please escape your master, for I am dying. The sun rises over the hill, spilling rays onto an empty valley floor, like water boiling over the rim of a pot an absent god once forged. The sun still burns, the pot is dry.
Wow. That's very powerful.
Yeah. Thank you, Marie. That was wonderful.
That's what the Great Salt Lake and Utah Lakes problems did to me.
Thank you. If you would like us to share that or would be okay with us sharing it, we'd be happy to. I can talk to you later
Okay.
about it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we would love a copy of Grow the Flow too. Wow, that was beautiful.
There's some comments in the chat. I'll read them. Shelly says, I think building on what Chloe said, we need to get people to the lake on bird tours, kayaking on the lake, participating in lake cleanup, visiting Antelope Island, reaching out to children and teenagers to get them involved. Yes, that's good. Elizabeth says, I think the broader community of the church in Utah should know that this is an important stewardship opportunity for members, and the church has actively done things to help it. I think there's a lack of knowledge of environmental issues often in our community, and sometimes people don't know that caring about this really aligns with our doctrine and what could give people a reason to care more than they might have otherwise.
Those are powerful suggestions.
Yeah, very true, especially since it's so local. Can I ask a question? I am curious. You mentioned how agriculture is like the main usage of water. So what are potential solutions for that? Like, I'm not familiar with Utah's agriculture to even know what they're growing per se. But I'm curious what the solutions are there, because that seems like a big problem to tackle.
Yeah, so the the primary agriculture that's contributing to this issue is alfalfa,
Okay.
which it does feel sort of random. Like most people don't associate alfalfa with the state of Utah. But there are some alfalfa farms that have existed for kind of a long, long time and have been passed down through families. And they represent about, I want to say it's about 0.5% of Utah's GDP. So not a huge output, but consume a vast majority of the water. And so it is a difficult issue because some people would like to just like circumvent the farmers and basically like cut them out. Which like theoretically might solve some of the issues, but these are people who are like generational farmers who really don't have anywhere else to go. And also, based on the way that the political districts are aligned in Utah, the people representing those farmers are really unlikely to support any kind of solution that would cut them out of the deal, basically. And so the other problem that contributes to this is that it's not just like the farmers are, obviously nobody is like maliciously trying to just use up all the water or destroy the lake, but there are laws in Utah that contribute to the farmers' behavior. For example, like there are use it or lose it laws where if the farmers don't use their water allocation in full, then their allocation for the next year will be reduced. And so even if they don't need all the water, they'll like run the water just to retain the right to use it the following year. And I know those exist in many forms in other states and they have their place, but in this circumstance, it's really frustrating because there are times where, the water that is being used is not the quantity that's actually needed. And so it is a multifaceted issue with agriculture because, we don't want to cut anybody out of their life's work or their generational work, their family's work. But at the same time, some of the laws could be adjusted so that the people could do the same work and consume less water. But there is kind of a lack of education. The average person doesn't understand those use it or lose it laws if they have no exposure to farming in Utah. So it is sort of a complicated issue. Nathan, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I just add, and yeah, absolutely all of that. One positive thing that it didn't like remove that law, but it did create a modification and kind of an allowance for water conservation to have the potential of being considered a beneficial use. And so they could use it, like let the water keep running down towards the lake without losing their water right. And I don't know all the details on that, if there's only certain situations where that's applicable.
Progress is being made.
But yeah. And then there's obviously like water efficient, like switching to more water efficient crops, using more water efficient watering mechanisms and irrigation techniques.
Is alfalfa a pretty water intensive crop?
Yes.
It's
Very
quite,
much so.
And
Especially in like Utah is basically a desert. So
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Are there other crops that would grow there easier? Or with less water? Sorry, I don't know.
there are.
Okay.
There's not, and obviously I can't speak fully, not being a farmer, but just from what I understand, there's not really an incentive to switch to other crops.
Okay.
Because of either the work that it would take to switch to other crops, or just they wouldn't be able to sell it for as much, or different things like that. And so that's another thing that could potentially be done, is to try to change the market for crops to incentivize using more water efficient agriculture.
And sorry to keep interrogating you about alfalfa, but Elizabeth says, and the alfalfa is mostly shipped overseas after harvest and not used locally in Utah, correct?
that is true.
And it feeds beef, cattle, which uses most of the alfalfa. So we need to get off meat, but that's a long-term solution, not a short-term.
Oh yeah, and so
Right.
cyclical, all connected.
Right.
That's interesting. Well, if you guys don't mind, let's open it up to other questions.
Please.
And before I forget, since we're talking about the Great Salt Lake, the Salt Lake chapter of LDS or Stewardship is holding a lake cleanup on April 27th. And I believe Mike Maxwell, who's the chair, put the link in the chat. So if anyone's interested, they're going to clean up the Salt Lake, and I believe have a ranger talk as well, or naturalist talk. If you're interested, go to the link because that should be a good way to help. So
And we'll be sure to promote that as well. Thanks for
okay,
letting us know.
awesome. Yeah. So it looks like we have a question. So if anyone has a question, you can talk with your mic or put it in the chat and I'll read it.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
Oh.
I've got a question. I want to go back to the agricultural question because I think that's a real cultural divide problem in just throughout the West, where people in ranching and farming communities tend to feel very much like outsiders and in conflict with people in suburban communities. And I'm curious, are there any specific strategies that Grow the Flow is working on to try to do outreach to agriculture communities, as opposed to just going up to the Capitol and, lobbying, which I think only in my experience creates more distrust and more resistance there. But I'm just curious if that's, there's anything in Growth Flow strategy to do outreach to agriculture to try to bring them in rather than sort of appear to be in conflict with them.
Yeah, great question. Short answer is yes. There are some things that we have coming in line, kind of up the line. We have a goal, and I think the start of plans to host, like, I don't know exactly the best words for describing it, but essentially like agricultural listening sessions, where we're hoping to invite farmers to come and just kind of be able to chat. I think would be part of it, and then also for us to share with them either facts about the lake or alternative solutions. We also have plans for hosting kind of some tech conferences, not like necessarily computer software stuff, but like agriculture tech, for, hey, here's the next cool thing for using less water. And that could be a great resource for them. And then also just kind of having one-on-one conversations. I know we've started some conversations with the Utah Farm Bureau. And so yeah, we that's going to be a really big focus in the hopefully near-term future.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. And I'll offer, we just started sort of brainstorming about this with our Salt Lake area chapter of Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship, because we've got people in the chapter that have actually, grew up in rural farming communities. And we have this, I think, real opportunity for common ground there. Last stats I saw that over 90% of multi-generational Utah agricultural landowners are Latter-day Saints. And so, there's a common ground of the gospel that maybe we can find with those folks. So if we can support that effort anyway, it's something that our chapter has been starting to strategize on, as to how maybe we could become more a part of that conversation to bring those communities together, rather than doing things like lobbying legislation that actually tends to create more resistance from those communities. So love to help in any way we can, support that effort.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's amazing. We'll be in contact for sure.
Great.
Great. Here's a question from Doug. It's kind of funny. Are the Great Salt Lake and Utah Lake naturally gross, or are they gross because of pollution? Good question.
Well, gross is a relative term, I guess, but yeah, a lot of the grossness, I suppose, is natural. Like Great Salt Lake, for example, has a lot of brine shrimp, and brine shrimp have carcasses when they die, and brine shrimp have bodily functions just like the rest of us. So there are things that contribute to the grossness of Great Salt Lake. The thing that is part of what contributes to that, and I'm no ecology expert, but Great Salt Lake and Utah Lake are both relatively like shallow lakes, and so that also contributes, is that they're pretty like wide and shallow, which contributes to much higher like ratio of surface area to like water underneath the surface. And so the surface area is where some of those like yucky dead things collect sometimes, and yeah, that definitely does contribute to the grossness. Nathan, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so like with Great Salt Lake specifically, a lot of the stink is, yeah, from the animals. When you've got 10 to 20 million birds flying through, you're gonna poop a lot, and that can definitely impact. But then also some of the biogeochemical processes that are going on, which are really cool. But they produce gases that don't often smell great. But they are really important. And so yeah, kind of like what Erica said, is there is some relativity. But and then also with Great Salt Lake, as it's draining with less water, there's a lot more exposed, and so there's more chance for things like that to start smelling. But yeah, some of it's natural.
Piggybacking off that question real quick, are there like algal blooms or problems with that from runoff?
On Great Salt Lake, not so much, mainly because the high salinity
Utah
levels.
Lake does. Utah Lake has algae blooms.
It does, yeah. And some of that is from the wastewater treatment plants dumping. The treatment plants have significantly decreased the amount of nutrients that they allow to be discharged into the lake. And so a lot of that isn't impacting. And honestly, a lot of Utah Lake is actually cleaner than most lakes across the world. There's only certain portions like Provo Bay, and maybe near some of the marinas where it's extra enclosed, extra shallow, extra warm. And just the combination of all of that makes this a nice mixing pot of algae and cyanobacteria.
Gotcha. Those are the only places I've been, so that's my experience, I guess. Tom says, Nathan said early on the water measurement in the state of Utah is lacking. What could be measured that would help people to better appreciate what is going on?
Yeah. And part of it could be just that like the water conservancy districts, who are the ones who kind of distribute water throughout the state, just haven't published any of their records, or the records that we need to know, like how much water is consumed versus let go. And that would be one of the biggest ones, is just having quantifiable data on how much water is actually being used by cities and by farmers and all these things.
And I would just tack onto that too,
Go for
like the way that we measure water, it's also like imprecise in nature when water is moving and flowing through, like from one place to another or through an ecosystem. And so part of it is just like measurement error, that it's really hard to capture an exact number of how much has been conserved or where exactly water is, just because you have to account for water in the ground, above the ground, water that's evaporated. Like it does become really imprecise really quickly.
Thank you. That's helpful. We're getting close to time, so I'll ask one last question from Brayman. And he said, has the response from BYU students, staff, and faculty been positive? What more can the campus community do to support your efforts?
Say yes, absolutely. It's been super supportive. Thanks, Brandon, for your support. And yeah, a majority of our current kind of intern team, because that's what we're running off of right now, is BYU students. And so the support has been really great. Students are really excited to get involved with this issue, I think because it's close to home, and it matters a lot. And we've also seen that at other universities, that there's a lot of energy And when people have time in between classes and tests and stuff, they want to help. And so yeah, we've been really grateful. What more can the campus community do to support our efforts? Erica, do you have any thoughts on that?
Just one thing that comes to mind is that I think the organization of BYU itself could maybe make more of an effort to like set a public example of good water use. For example, I know they have like slightly decreased the amount of water they use to continue landscaping the campus, which if you've ever been to campus, is beautiful. There are a lot of grass areas everywhere, a lot of high water usage grass. And there's been studies done, for example, like Dr. Hansen in the PWS department, he's done a lot of work on like we could be watering the same amount of grass with a lot less water. And that has not always been well received by BYU, or not really, like not a lot of action has always been taken. I think it's sort of hit or miss. I think BYU as an organization has the opportunity to set an example here, kind of like the church has in donating their water shares and using like landscaping that's more water usage friendly, like Nathan was referencing earlier. I think BYU could kind of adopt some of those same principles, and I would personally love to see that, as I think that would kind of spark more of these conversations with students who aren't familiar with the issue as well. So I would love to see that in the future.
Think about watering in general, whether it's farming or lawns or whatever. The time of day you do it makes a big difference how much water you use.
Amen
If
to
you do it
Yes.
that.
right during the afternoon, there's going to be a lot of evaporation.
That is another BYU campus issue right there.
Well, it's also a farming issue.
Absolutely.
I don't know if they're aware of it. Hopefully, they're doing better on that than they used to, but seems like I've seen watering going on during the day when it shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, agreed. But I think
Generally,
overall the community at BYU is really supportive, especially like when we are able to have these conversations, people are really receptive and interested in what we have to say, which I really appreciate.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Nathan and Erica, so much for coming. This was really informative. I learned a lot. And just one little tidbit, Elizabeth put a link to a documentary of the beauty of the Great Salt Lake in there, if anyone is interested. Thanks again, Nathan and Erica, for coming. Thank you, everyone, for listening. It's always a joy to see you. And we will see you in June. So stay tuned for details and
Thank you for
have a
having
good night.
us.